My wife, 42 female, and I, 48 male, were married for 14 years. We never had any children, but that's not to say we didn't try. She was a manager at Kmart and I worked in a shipping warehouse. It wasn't glamorous, but it felt like we belonged with each other and our work crew. We had a routine in friends like family that I wouldn't have traded for the world. We were always honest, talkative, attentive, and considerate of each other. Our sense of humor was pretty dark. We liked watching and reading things online that would make other people squeamish. We also thought it was super funny when we ripped on each other and our friends thought we were seriously fighting. People from our apartment building would take turns cooking on the grill for the rest of us for a giant cookout. One day, the grill was moved to a different spot and caught a tree on fire. It spread to roof of the building and down all in a matter of minutes. Thankfully, everyone survived, but my wife and I passed out and had to be rescued by a volunteer firefighter before the fire trucks even arrived. We were taken to the hospital for asphyxiation from smoke inhalation. I was discharged 2 weeks before my wife because she wasn't able to cover her mouth and nose like I did while I searched for her. It's impossible to see in smoke like that, so I started choking before I found her. While my wife recovered, she was conscious, but she needed special attention and respiratory treatment. I noticed one doctor that seemed to care very deeply about my wife. He was handsome and charming, which irritated me. My wife smiled at him, and they looked into each other's eyes very intently when they mostly him spoke. When I started staying by my wife's side, the doctor told me he was the one to receive her that day in the ER, and he'd been looking after her ever since. I didn't know how to respond. I wanted my wife to get the care she needed, but I didn't like this guy. He seemed to think too highly of himself and think he could take my wife if he wanted to. When he helped her stand up, he put his arm around her waist and held her close. She took her time moving when he was like that. I was struggling with my thoughts at this point. She didn't really need help walking, did she? My wife could barely speak, but she seemed smitten with the doctor and emotionally strained when she looked at me. She never said anything really alarming, but it was clear something had changed. We had a near-death experience, and that does change people, but I didn't want to believe my wife, and I wouldn't make it through this together unchanged. When it was time for her to be discharged, she hesitated to go home. She asked if she could stay in the hospital longer, which gave the doctor the opportunity to offer her follow-up visits at her home. I was very suspicious and didn't think it was all in my head anymore. I thought about objecting, but decided not to. I imagined how bad and weird it would look for me to deny my wife doctor visits. Even if he was pushing boundaries, I'd look like the bad guy. I couldn't believe he so easily agreed to make house visits. This was something a person with much less qualifications could have done, so I was positive it was because he at least wanted to visit my wife, if not more. The very first doctor visit was at 9 a.m. on a Tuesday. Of course, I was at work. I texted my wife at 9:10 to ask if he was there and how it was going. She didn't reply, so I started to wonder what was going on. I felt like a shell of a person walking around the warehouse. 2 hours later, I still heard nothing from her. Coworkers approached me, concerned for my well-being because I was pale and clammy. At 11:25, I was pulling into her driveway. I drove recklessly to get there as fast as I could after I got permission from my boss. I noticed his luxury vehicle and that the front door was locked, which was unusual for when we had a visitor. As I walked up the stairs, I heard them. Our dresser was pinning the bedroom door open against the wall because privacy was never a concern of ours. When I got there, I just dropped to my knees. I had no control over my body. The doctor leaped up and scrambled to get his pants on, flushed and angry. My wife covered herself with blankets, yelling helplessly as I rose to my feet and started throwing punches. It was the loudest I heard her since before the fire, and it made my blood run cold. She wasn't the woman I married anymore. Something made her change and let this man screw up her emotions. After I got in a few punches in my adrenalized state, the doctor must have realized what a dire and unprofessional situation he was in, because he stumbled down the stairs, got to his car, and drove off. In the bedroom, my wife apologized profusely and pleaded for me to forgive her, but I just screamed no and called her names that accurately described what she did. Of course, when I said cheater, she tried to say I stopped them, so it didn't count. She failed to understand that trying to seduce him with her eyes and gestures in the hospital and making out with him in the nude still counted as cheating. At first, I was worried he was going to press charges against me, and it would be my word against his, but nothing happened for months. I tried to get the doctor fired, but it didn't work because nothing was captured on camera, and he hadn't told anyone he was making a house call. Plus, he had expensive lawyers that would pin all the blame on me for causing him injuries. My wife left pitiful voicemails on my phone, but when she realized I couldn't stand to look at her, she continued seeing the doctor, even before our divorce was final. I ended up kicking her out of the house, and a week later she posted that she was in a relationship with him. It made me sick. Life really seemed cruel, unfair, and without reason at this point. Thankfully, that's when it all started to turn around. She moved in with the doctor, who wasn't going to hand her money to help with the divorce aftermath. It didn't take long before AP realized what a mess she was and dumped her, kicking her to the curb when she had nothing else. She was so defeated, she didn't even try to get me to let her back in. Her sister let her move in, since she was exceptionally depressed after screwing up her whole life with me. My ex calls me occasionally, saying she misses me and would give anything in the world to have another chance at being my wife. She sort of blames the fire at our apartment for screwing up her head and making her think she felt things for the doctor when it was just survivor thankfulness. I didn't believe a word she said. For all I knew, she wouldn't be saying any of that to me if it weren't for AP leaving her. OP, I am so sorry your wife cheated on you with her doctor. It most likely was because her emotions of recovery influenced her to do something she hadn't done before. Emotions are not as big and powerful as what people think. With maturity, practice, and self-control, anyone can manage their emotions and do what's right. If denying the temptation bothers them that much, they should wait 72 hours after rejoining their spouse before deciding to talk to them about it. This conversation could end the relationship since there's temptation, but at least there's a chance some sense could be talked into the tempted one and the two of you could grow stronger. You did the right thing by separating from her after stopping them. That's the only way to get a clear head and realize you're going to be okay without that person in your life. It takes strength and courage to part from people that have hurt us, but it is better to stand on your own for a while than with a traitor. Thanks for sharing with us. Now let's move on to our next story for the day. At the time of this story, my wife was 26 and I was 25. We were getting along fine, married for 3 years, together for 6. Ironically, one of the things that attracted me to her the most was her maturity. She usually thought through any big life decisions very carefully, like what college she went to, haircuts she tried, and most importantly, when she wanted to have kids. Her parents raised her to think things through, but they were never very good with money. Her grandmother was the one to put her through college. So in her 3rd year of marriage, we had debt from my schooling and some of hers, and she still hadn't landed a job in her field. What she was working wasn't paying well at all, so a lot of the strain was on me. I could tell she felt bad, but I didn't know she was about to make a big decision without talking to me first. She decided to sell her car and met a potential buyer on a Monday while I was at work. He was very excited about it, but he couldn't drive it home until the weekend. So to reserve it, he paid her in full cash. She gave him a bill of sale, dated, signed, and notarized. However, she continued driving the car, and I didn't realize she'd sold it. She mentioned over dinner that she really loved her car, and then she broke down into tears. That's when she explained it all to me and added that she'd spent half of his cash on our bills and debt payments. I was pretty upset with her, and I told her she'd probably have to sell her car to him since we couldn't pay him back his money. Her face was deflated, but accepted facts. She screwed up by selling a car she loved and needed, but she had to follow through now. I was at work on Saturday when my wife said the buyer was coming to get the car. She didn't respond to me while he was there, so that made me worry. I checked the live feed of our security camera out front. I only saw a guy, crew cut, standing in the driveway with the cars, but I rewound it a little and saw that the buyer had arrived with a crew cut to help drive the cars home. When my wife talked to him, it seemed like she was giving him bad news. He waved his arms around and rubbed his head like she was stressing him out. Just when it looked like he was threatening to sue her, she got him to quiet down and lean close to her so she could whisper something. She didn't know the camera didn't record audio. Instantly, his face softened and he smiled. He looked so surprised and happy with whatever she said. He glanced at the camera as my wife took him by the hand and led him around to the back of the house where we didn't have cameras. Crew cut just waited awkwardly in the driveway for several minutes. I was already driving home, furious. By the time I got there, the men and their car were gone. My wife's car was still there. She greeted me warmly as if everything was fine until she saw the anger in my eyes. I shoved past her to the backyard where I searched our patio furniture for any signs of foul play. Stuff looked moved around, but I couldn't find anything. I looked across the yard and noticed that our neighbor had a backyard camera that covered our yard too. I knocked on their door, and after hearing my story, they invited me in and recovered the footage for me. They watched the video with me, the first time of my wife having sex with the guy on the patio, just like I pictured. I spent walk towards my wife, standing helplessly worried in the backyard. She knew what I was doing and that our marriage could be over. As soon as I started playing her the video, she dropped to her knees. She didn't want to see it and tried saying she was sorry over and over again, as if that would make it all go away. I told her I hated her for what she did to me. I started my life with her, accepting her past and life as my responsibility, and I managed to keep her safe and happy, only for her to end it all by sleeping with someone to pay off a debt. It was low and desperate, and she didn't need to do it. I told her to own up to her decision and follow through with selling the car. She went behind my back and lied more than once. My heart was broken. She told me she didn't see any other way out of it because she felt like she needed her car and his money. Then she kind of bragged by saying she offered him half his money back, but he said her skills paid him back in full. I packed my stuff while she cried and talked about how our bills were paid, so I should be happy and forget anything happened. I went to stay with my coworker. It was awkward and it made me feel lost. I had to find my packed toothbrush and toothpaste, and while digging through my bag of belongings, I found a pair of my wife's undies. It made me grieve for my loss. She fought me tooth and nail in court, even trying to claim that I was abusive and she was desperate to fall in love again. It was nothing like what you'd expect a woman to say to a judge. Since she couldn't prove anything and I had her cheating on film, she was ordered to leave the house. I sold it and started my life over in a different state, where I was offered twice my previous salary for doing the same amount of work. I know I lucked out and most infidelity victims aren't so lucky, but I wanted people to know that even when I felt that heart pang at my wife's clothing mixed with mine, I didn't run back to her. I deserved a chance at genuine love with someone else, and I actually found it in my new home state of Connecticut. What your wife did was extremely low, and it shows that she didn't think very highly of herself or the vows she took to remain loyal to you. It's hard to imagine why she didn't talk to you about selling her car in the first place, or at least think it through. You did the right thing by checking the camera and going home to figure out what was happening, and as hard as it was to leave her there, feeling so remorseful, it was the right thing for you. After a spouse has committed adultery, it's a good idea to take some days away from them without contact. They've already cheated, so keeping an eye on them is only going to stress you out and make you more desperate to save the relationship instead of realizing you're okay without someone who's willing to do this to you. She made a very, very poor decision that the relationship couldn't recover from, all because she didn't talk to her spouse first about what she was thinking. Thank you all for taking the time to listen to today's stories. If you enjoyed listening, please feel free to like and subscribe if you haven't already. Also, comment below with your thoughts on what happened. If there is a story you would like to share with me about your own situation or someone else's, then please do not hesitate to contact. I'll tell you a pretty sad story that happened to me. I hope this never happens to anyone else, but maybe my story can help you if it does. My wife was invited to a company ball. It was really fancy, so ballroom attire was required. 2 weeks prior to the ball, she started to get really anxious about everything. She even asked me if I was sure I wanted to go. She said if I would rather stay home and relax, that would be fine. She usually begged me to go places with her, and if I insisted on staying home, that she gave me a list of chores to do. The fact that she offered me the idea of relaxation was weird. I told her I was going, and she could relax about it. When it got close to the day of the ball, my wife was using her phone excessively. She never told me why, and I didn't feel welcome to ask. We were in the car at one point, and her phone connected to the Bluetooth, and she freaked out. She started the power button a few times when the Bluetooth didn't disconnect. Her face turned really red, and she just started looking out the window. It was so worrisome. What was she so paranoid about me seeing? She went into the store and couldn't have been too paranoid, because her phone was laying on her seat. I decided to look through it. I didn't find anything interesting in the texts, so I checked her email, and an opened email said she had test results to see on her doctor's website. I looked, and it was a test result positive for an incurable STD. I could not believe what I was reading and the magnitude of what I just found. I wondered if she was planning to tell me anytime soon. We hadn't had sex in 3 months, the longest we ever went. These results were dated from 4 days ago. Did I have what she had? My mind was reeling when my wife started running back to the car with groceries. I thought I had enough time to check one more thing. I did a search in her apps for WhatsApp and boom, she had it. I opened it and saw a string of texts to a man named Michael. The only Michael I knew she was associated with was her boss. I locked her phone and put it on her seat. She got in the car and was relieved to see her phone. She said she wasn't sure if she dropped it and looked at me closely for a few seconds while she tried to figure out if I looked through it. I put on my best poker face and drove us home. We arrived at the ball before I had another chance to check her phone. I didn't sleep with her and I didn't ask her anything. I wanted to know when she was planning to tell me this terrible news. I already considered the possibility of her cheating on me because I didn't think I had the same thing she did. But I couldn't know for sure until I got tested. Why, unless she was cheating on me, would she hesitate to tell me this diagnosis? All of this was going through my head as we entered the ball. We had seats at a table, which is where my wife set down her little handheld purse. I thought about trying to sneak a peek at her phone. We were greeted by her boss personally. He kissed my wife's hand and told her he was so glad she was there. She introduced me to him unenthusiastically, and he greeted me with the same level of dismissal. He asked me if he could have the first dance with my lovely wife, and I felt like I didn't have a choice. Besides, I wanted to look at my wife's phone. While she danced with him, it looked like they were whispering to themselves. It was weird, and I had just about enough. I started looking through my wife's phone without any care if she saw me. I opened her WhatsApp and discovered that Michael confirmed precisely what time we would get here, and scrolling up just a bit more showed that they planned to sneak away as soon as I went to the bathroom or stepped outside for a smoke. I looked up at them in shock. They were at the bar getting drinks now. I looked through more of her messages with him talking about the sex they've had and how they want to have it again. My wife even mentioned her recent diagnosis to him, and he apologized for not telling her about it. She freaked out over text asking him how she was supposed to tell her husband she suddenly had an incurable STD after 7 years of marriage. He offered that perhaps she wouldn't ever need to tell me if she just left me for him. I took screenshots of it all and sent the collection to my phone. Then I used her phone to post it all on her social media platforms. She was friends with people all over this ballroom. I saw people looking at their phones gasping and then looking up to find my wife or the boss. I included a few messages of slander towards their coworkers and employees. I watched someone urgently alert the boss to a problem, and he left the ballroom to talk about it. My wife was left alone, so she started walking back towards our table. She looked extremely uncomfortable, like she noticed something was wrong and people were staring at her. I stared at her too, fake smiling with my hands folded in front of me. She greeted me skeptically. I simply said, "I'm going to file for divorce because you are no longer my wife." Her jaw dropped and she sat next to me asking me what was going on. I handed her back her phone and told her to check what she posted a few minutes ago. She was really confused and looked at me like I wasn't making sense. When she opened her phone, I saw the moment of agony show up on her face. She looked at me with tears in her eyes, her hand covering her mouth. She realized her boss was most likely fired, which meant she would be fired. She realized everyone in the room was staring at her because they now knew, officially not speculating, that she was sleeping with the boss and both of them had an STD. How despicable and disgusting. She ugly cried while she grabbed her stuff and left the hotel heading for my car. I followed her, slowly nodding in acknowledgement to every person that eyed me up. I had the keys in my pocket and I was not giving her a ride to my house. When I got to the car, she was standing there with her arms crossed. I asked her what she thought she was doing. She said she wanted to get in the car and go home. I asked her if she met her parents' house or her boss' house. She looked at me shocked and upset. She asked me not to do this and said I couldn't be serious. I said I would show her how serious I was, that she was never coming back to my house or getting in my car again. I unlocked my door, only got in and locked it again. She was screaming at me to let her in, but it quickly turned to desperate sobbing. A crowd gathered outside the hotel watching us by her car. They all knew she was the one sleeping with the boss. She was the one with the STD. She gave up on trying to get in the car with me and opted for sprinting into the woods lining the parking lot. I drove home. I didn't care what happened to her anymore. I scheduled a doctor's appointment the next day. It was 3 days later that I got back my test results, which thankfully said I was clean. I also heard my ex's boss was fired. As soon as her boss got an opportunity to sneak away from the intense scrutiny he packed his bags and left. On the way, he stopped to pick up my ex. They haven't returned to town since then. I put all my ex's belongings outside between two tarps. That was more consideration than she ever gave me. However, she never returned for it. My most helpful support through the breakup was my dog. Also heard my ex was dumped by Michael after 5 months. Wow. What a glamorous place to discover the disturbing secrets your wife hid from you. It was lucky that she put down her phone so you could expose their infidelity and shameful behavior to everyone they associated with. It's so lucky you didn't sleep with her before discovering the truth. It's also lucky you weren't tricked into raising an affair child. She behaved like a succubus, probably choosing to sleep with her boss because he was wealthy. A woman that does this can never be trusted. She doesn't have the right values in life and probably never will unless she's humbled by the challenges of life. It sounds like she definitely went through some hardships brought on by her actions. I wish you nothing but the best of luck in life, OP. Now let's get into today's second story. My girlfriend 22 had a job babysitting for this one really nice family we both knew from church. They were wealthy, so spending time in their house wasn't really a chore. To make things even better, their younger kids were really well behaved and went to sleep easily. She had me 25 come over a few times while she was babysitting and the kids were in bed. We never did the hokey pokey or anything, although it felt like we could have gotten away with it. This family had an older son named John. He was 18, but they didn't usually have him babysit because he was always up to something or at hockey practice. One time while she was babysitting, my girlfriend randomly stopped responding to my texts. I thought something was seriously wrong. She already told me the kids were asleep, but I guessed there was a small chance one of them woke up again. I waited an hour and didn't hear anything. I decided to drive over there to check it out. At first, nothing appeared to be wrong. No flashing police lights or anything scary like that. I walked up the path to the front door and noticed an odd movement through the window. I cupped my hands around my face to see into the living room through a tiny gap in the blinds. I was shocked to see John having sex with my girlfriend. I turned away and tried to open the front door, but it was locked. Just then, a car pulled into the driveway in a hurry. It barely stopped before the door opened and John's dad jumped out. I put my hands up instinctually and said, "I just got here." John's dad paid me no mind at all. He just rushed to the front door and unlocked it in a hurry. He barged in, followed by John's mom, asking what the hell they thought they were doing. My girlfriend screamed and John yelled. His dad told him to get out of the house. He was not allowed to have unprotected premarital sex in their home with his younger siblings asleep upstairs. He asked them how terrible it would have been if the kids came downstairs and found them having sex. He looked to my girlfriend, who had only managed to get her underwear back on, and told her she was supposed to be the responsible adult in this situation, and she failed miserably. It was then that my girlfriend noticed I was standing in the doorway. She burst into tears and put the rest of her clothes on. She apologized sincerely to John's dad, mom, and me before she got in her car and left. I realized I had no place there now that my cheating girlfriend left the scene. Just as I was about to leave, John's mom followed me outside, closing the front door behind her to muffle the yelling between John and his dad. She apologized to me for what I was going through. She reminded me that the end of one relationship doesn't have to be the end of the world. I thanked her and asked how they knew what was happening at the house. She said they had a hidden camera in the living room that connected to their cell phones. They'd see me every time I was at their house, but since they knew I was a well-behaved man, they didn't mind me hanging out with my girlfriend. They actually felt their kids were safer when I was there too. I told my parents everything that happened. I lived on my own at this point, but I needed their support. They told me I didn't need to ever speak to my girlfriend again. She proved herself unfit to be a wife. Just then she called me. She told me she would never make this mistake again. I believed her, but that didn't mean I wanted her back. I asked her why she did it and what happened. She just told me that after John came home, he started talking with her, and after a while asked point blank if she wanted to have sex. She gave in, not really thinking too hard about it. It hurt to hear that. How could she just not think about it? She gave in to her primal instincts with little resistance, assuming she wouldn't get caught. It was so unfair to me, her loving boyfriend. I was loyal to her even when a woman from my job came on to me. Well, that phone call was all I needed to officially decide I wasn't going to stay with her anymore. I told her on the same phone call, "All right, well, it was nice knowing you, but our time together has come to an end. I wish you the best," and hung up. It wasn't very long until she tried to call me again several times, but I never answered. John's parents had told my ex's parents and the church that they caught her having sex in their house while she was supposed to be babysitting. I didn't keep up with my ex since, but heard she moved out of town. I am so sorry you went through the worry and panic and found your girlfriend cheating. It's a shame she didn't treat that family, you and herself, with more respect. It doesn't sound like she's mature enough for a serious relationship or job. You made the right decision to seek support and leave her. A good partner would never do anything to jeopardize their relationship, even if supposedly no one is watching. I wish you the best of luck going forward. Thank you all for taking the time to listen to today's stories. If you enjoyed listening, please feel free to like and subscribe if you haven't already. Also comment below with your thoughts on what happened. My wife and I were married for 10 years. I was her first and, I thought, only sexual partner. We married at 22 years old, and when the story I'm about to tell you took place, we were 32. I was told she went on a vacation with her sister, but throughout the week she was gone. Her responses became weird and less frequent. I was already worried by the time she got back, and my fears were only confirmed by her very strange behavior. She said she didn't feel well, and this was right before COVID reached the US, so she made a doctor's appointment. After that one, she went to a second one, but wouldn't tell me what was going on. I was in the dark and cared about my wife. I wanted answers, so I decided to search her car for appointment summaries or anything that might give me some clues. In her car, I found an open STD test and a visit summary from her doctor that said she tested positive for herpes. I started shaking and didn't want to believe it. I sat in her car for a while, staring at the trees around me. I obviously couldn't sleep with my wife again. Then I got scared. I already had it. I went to stay with my mom for a few days while I waited for my own test results. My wife barely noticed my absence, because she was dealing with her own problems. Thank God my test results were clean. She didn't get it from me or give it to me. Now I could address the issue at hand. My wife had to face reality. I was already irritated that she didn't tell me anything about it. I had lots of questions, but they didn't really need answering. I didn't really need to know how she got herpes, only that she did while she was on vacation with her sister. Her sister worked with her in the same office, which gave me an idea. I received an email invite to a work party, and attached to that email were all the emails of her coworkers and bosses. I emailed everyone a picture of my wife's diagnosis, with a text that said my wife brought home a present from vacation. The response was astounding. Before my wife realized what I did, her sister called me. She asked what was going on, and I told her all about it. She admitted that she wasn't with my wife the whole time they were gone. At first she thought I was being really unfair by sharing my wife's private issue with her work crew, but after I vented to her about it and brought up the impending divorce, she sided with me. Just then my wife came outside and banged on the car window. She looked furious and terrified. She screamed and cried inaudible words. I got out of the car, and she started hitting me, but stopped when I told her she cheated on me. She couldn't keep it together. She was overwhelmed and probably hadn't even let the reality of her STD or infidelity sink in. I told her she cheated on me while on vacation and got herpes. She betrayed me, and now I would never sleep with her again. She cried breathlessly, tried saying sorry, tried saying she used protection, but none of it mattered, and I think she knew that. She went back inside the house, defeated after I told her to pack her stuff. Her sister came over because she was on the phone for some of our confrontations. She helped her pack and calmed her down by talking about the future she could have. All the motivation left her when she tried to go to work. She received so much backlash and shame for what she did to me. Whether it was to her face or notes left on her desk, she was insulted, called out, and slandered. She only worked for one day after vacation before quitting. Her sister's been really quiet, and as far as I know, she still lives with her. It wouldn't surprise me if she quit dating for a while, or even had trouble forgiving herself. I know I lucked out and dodged a bullet by doing my own investigation and separating myself from her while I figured out what I needed to know. I hope she uses protection and tells people about her diagnosis and cheating habits. OP. I am so sorry your wife completely disrespected you and spat on your trust. She'll have trouble living this mistake down. You were a trusting husband that let her go on vacation without you in good faith. She took advantage of you by sleeping with another man, and it's only karma that she got an STD. I am so glad she didn't try to seduce you upon her return before you knew what was happening. You really did dodge a bullet with this one. I'm glad to hear she couldn't hide her diagnosis and had to face the shame she deserved for betraying her husband. Any woman who believes she needs another man to love her needs a serious reality check. Love is designed to be true between two people that openly communicate and choose to love the other no matter what. Quite the opposite of taking advantage of the trust your spouse gives you. I wish you the best of luck. You've absolutely did the right thing and acted on your wisdom to figure out what was going on. Thank you for sharing your story. Now let's get into today's second story. Last Valentine's Day with my wife, 33, was the end of our 7-year marriage. She was supposed to get off work at 5, but at 4:50 she texted me to say her aunt has a date for Valentine's, and since she has trouble finding dates, she felt obligated to babysit her kids for her. I said that was fine and I could meet her there. She told me that wouldn't be necessary. Her aunt was weird about having men at her house because her children were in recovery from their abusive father, who had been out of the picture for some time now. This conversation really bummed me out, but I figured if my wife could be so self-sacrificing on this romantic day, then I could. For an hour, I believed my wife's story, but then she posted a status update that gave her location. She thought ahead and made it so neither I nor our mutual friends could see her post. But she forgot about one person. Her 15-year-old cousin, the girl she was supposed to be babysitting. She actually messaged me to ask how I was doing and gave me some disconcerting news. She showed me the screenshot of my wife's status and location, which said she was having a wonderful Valentine's Day at an upscale restaurant. Her cousin was one heck of a snoop and knew something was amiss because my wife didn't tag me or include a picture of her and I together like she always did. Due to the inconsistencies, she decided to show me. She didn't know that my wife used her as a lie in the babysitting ruse, but I left that part out and just thanked her. I checked the family locator app, which we both never thought about since we were always together and my wife's cell phone was no longer at the restaurant. She was in a neighborhood. I decided to see what other snooping I could manage, so I messaged one of my wife's coworkers on Facebook. She didn't hesitate to tell me that something was probably going on with her and a guy from the office. She said they would often deliver work papers to each other's cubicle, but she believed they were handwritten notes. They also ate lunch together in the small office kitchen every day. It seems they were trying to make it look like they were only coworkers, but there was something more to it. I couldn't believe how easy it was to gather intel from people had I been blind. I wanted to check my wife's phone, but since I couldn't, I told her coworker about her Valentine's Day lie and how she was in a different neighborhood at that very moment. She asked if it was the Sunny Day development and I was shocked that it was. She said AP lived there. She was at his house once for a party. I showed her the exact spot my wife's icon hovered over the neighborhood and she said it was definitely close enough to be his house. I had enough. I thanked her and got off social media. I started throwing my wife's clothes and belongings out the window. Loose clothes were strewn all over the yard and roof. It started raining before she got home and I thought karma was just giving me an extra hand. I wrote a note to put on our front door that read, "Happy Valentine's Day. Don't bother coming back ever again." When she got home late, I could hear her screaming and freaking out. She banged on the door, rang the doorbell a whole bunch, but I barricaded myself inside. I heard her on the phone with her mom and then her dad, and from what I could hear, it sounded like they couldn't believe she was locked out of her own house with her clothes all over the yard. She kept saying she didn't know why, but eventually broke down and said she lied to me and had a date with someone else. So she needed her dad's help taking all her stuff somewhere. I imagine they asked her why she did this because all she said was she didn't know. She didn't want to tell me in case I freaked out and stuff like that. She sounded like a pitiful little girl that made a shameful decision to lie and cheat on her husband, believing she could get away with it. And now she was forced to semi-admit to what she'd done over the phone with her dad so that he could come to her rescue. He showed up and I came outside. I told them both what I found out, all while my wife was gone. She was crying and telling me I was exaggerating and jumping to conclusions. I put her on the spot to prove I was lying by showing me the messages she had with AP. I knew his real name and her face turned pale when I asked. She said she didn't have any messages with him, but I could see her father's disappointment. I asked him if he thought she was lying because he knew her the best and he was embarrassed to say yes. She started screaming and wailing and dropped to the ground. I told her to suck it up because she was a big girl who made the decision to cheat on me and lie this Valentine's Day. Now she had to face the consequences of her big girl decision. She was devastated. I could tell she didn't want our marriage to end that night. She didn't want it to end. She wouldn't ever step foot into our house again. She didn't get to say goodbye to our dog. It's lucky I never had children with her because that would have been heart-wrenching. Let this be a lesson to think through your actions before betraying the one person that matters most in your life. No actions go without repercussions. She stayed with her parents for a while, but they were extremely disappointed in her and couldn't believe a word she said. She didn't get to leave their house at all unless it was for work, and she wasn't welcome back if she was 5 minutes past her expected return. P. I am so sorry your wife betrayed you on Valentine's Day. Of course it's just the same as any other day, but since it's become notorious for true love it adds insult to injury. I'm so glad you did some sleuthing to figure out what was going on. I'm glad the girl she used as part of her lie stepped forward without even knowing your wife brought her into it. Your ex turned a kind gesture into a lie you couldn't believe. No one can maintain a relationship with that kind of dishonesty. Can you even imagine how hard it would be to have a healthy relationship with her after this? Your ex needs to mature a little and learn how important it is to remain loyal and honest in her relationships. Without that, she doesn't deserve the benefits of a romantic partnership. As hard as it was, you took the right steps to distance yourself from this girl. I wish you the best of luck. Thank you all for taking the time to listen to today's stories. If you enjoyed listening, please feel free to like and subscribe if you haven't already. Also comment below with your thoughts on what happened. Everything between me and my wife, 31 female, seemed perfect on the outside. We have been together since high school. It was like something out of a romantic comedy. She was the nerdy girl who spent her lunch periods in the library and I was the football player. Even though historically we would have never spent time together, she and I ended up falling for each other. Right after college, we ended up getting married so we could move forward and start our lives together. We bought our first house very young, we both scored very nice jobs, and we started planning to have kids. Fast forward 3 years and we have one son and another baby on the way. In high school, my wife had a friend who had always rubbed me the wrong way. It was so obvious that he had a thing for her, but she constantly insisted that he was just nice. I tried to explain to her that it made me uncomfortable when she spent a lot of time with him because it was clear to me that he liked her and didn't care that she and I were happily married. Whenever I would bring it up, it would always cause an argument, so eventually I gave up. They talked on the phone all the time, they would always be texting each other and sending memes, and they had a ton of little inside jokes that I always felt like I was on the outside of. He didn't attend the same college as us, but they reconnected after graduation when we all moved back to our hometown. As it turned out, he was studying in the same field as her, so they were able to land a job at the same company. My wife didn't have a ton of friends in high school, so when she made a lot of friends at her new job, she was very excited. She was buddy-buddy with a lot of the girls in the office, and they would go to brunches, theater, and they would even have sleepovers on occasion. I was really happy for her because I knew she was looking for a group like that for so long, and part of me thought she would be spending less time with her male best friend. Last winter, I started to notice the difference in how she interacted with him. She didn't talk to him as often, or at least I didn't see them talking as much. He stopped coming over to the house, and I only saw him on occasion when I would visit the office. I was hopeful that she had outgrown him and they were finally parting ways. One day my wife came to me and told me that a bunch of the girls from the office were planning a girls' trip for the weekend. She told me it would be harmless fun, just drinking some wine and talking while they relaxed with their face masks. She left Friday evening and I stayed at home with the kids. I genuinely hadn't thought anything was wrong. Saturday evening rolls around and I'm in bed searching through Netflix looking for something to watch when my phone rings. It was a phone call for her male best friend. Right away I thought it was strange because he and I had never really been close, so him calling me was bizarre. I answered the phone and waited for him to say something, but he never did. I was about to hang up the phone when I heard a part of the conversation they were having. He was telling my wife how much he loved her. My wife was on the other line as well. Wherever she had gone for the weekend, he had gone as well. I absolutely could not put down the phone while I listened. She told him that she regretted what they had done a few weeks ago, and that last night was a mistake. She had gone there to have a conversation with him and end everything. It was then that I realized there never was a girls' trip. They continued their conversation until I could hear them kissing on the other line, then I finally hung up. I couldn't believe what I just heard. I felt sick to my stomach and I wanted to scream, but I couldn't do anything to upset my children. At first I thought it was such an odd time to be but dialed by him. The more I thought about it, people only but dial their recent contacts, so it didn't make sense for him to have accidentally called me. He did it on purpose. He called me while he had that conversation, hoping I would overhear it. About an hour passed, then I got the text messages. They were all from him. They were screenshots of conversations, pictures they had sent each other, and even a clip from a video that he had taken at the lake house they were staying in. I was absolutely shocked. It was the last thing I wanted to see, but I was glad he sent it. I didn't say anything back. He probably thought that he had won this imaginary fight that he and I have been having for the past 10 years, but I would find a way to make them both pay. I sat on the information, stewing in all of the ideas that I had to get revenge on them both. I knew that I wanted to get them fired, but that didn't seem like punishment enough. My wife came back Sunday night and couldn't even meet my eyes. She felt guilty for what she did, as she should have. By the end of the week, she would only feel worse. I pretended like nothing happened, not wanting to stir the pot and upset our children any more than they would be after everything. Their well-being was my priority, which apparently she didn't care too much about. On Wednesday, I was able to get a meeting with her boss. Her company had a strict no dating within the workplace rule, so I knew at the very least they would both be reprimanded for that. The real kicker in all of it was that one of the pictures my wife's friend sent me was of them together in the break room. I had attended many company Christmas parties in the past, so I recognized it well. Her boss was horrified when she saw the images of them together. No doubt she was thinking about how she drank her coffee at the table they screwed on. Now I knew my wife and I knew her well. I was certain she had no clue her friend sent me any of the information that he did. When she found out what he did, she would want nothing to do with him. His little power play cost him any chance he had of being with her after our separation. As soon as I stepped out of the office, I watched her boss storm over to her friend and practically drag him into the office. I went right over to my wife's desk and I dropped an envelope with all of the printed documents I had been sent alongside divorce papers. She had one of those open offices that didn't like to use cubicles or box their workers in, so everybody got a good view when I served her the papers. I told her that I wanted a divorce. Then, with my voice raised higher than it normally would be, I told her I knew everything about her affair with her friend. I watched the women around her raise their eyebrows and hurriedly look away as if they couldn't hear anything. My wife's face was as red as a tomato. She was so embarrassed. I walked out of the office knowing that she was likely about to get fired for what happened in the break room. I took the kids to my brother's house and we stayed with him for a few weeks while I looked for another apartment. She and I are officially divorced, but we're still going through custody hearings for the children. We have agreed on joint custody, but the biggest issue is figuring out the holiday schedule. She and her friend were both fired, and from what I understand, she has completely cut him off. She moved back in with her mom, and I ended up selling the house that I got to keep. OP, I'm so sorry you had to go through that. Her friend's intentions were always clear to you from the start, and it's such a shame that she wouldn't listen to you. Setting up clear boundaries between the two of them could have prevented the fallout of your marriage, but it seems like she might have had lingering feelings for him too. The worst part of all of this is that she didn't even have the courage to tell you about the affair. He only called to hurt you. You're right that it does seem like some sick power play on his end. I really hope you were able to move on from this and find someone else more worth the time and effort. Now let's move on to our next story. I 26 male met my ex 25 female in college, but we didn't date right away. We ended up running into each other after graduation and hooking up. She and I had been running in the same circles, but we weren't close by any means in college. After running into her, I did admit that I had a bit of a crush on her at some point, and she told me that she felt the same way. Things were good with us for a while. We had been together for 3 years when I popped the question and asked her to be my wife. She was beyond excited and told me that she wanted nothing more than to be my wife. We hadn't been living together at the time. She was on a lease with a roommate and she didn't want to abandon her. After our engagement, she slowly started moving things over so she could officially live with me when her lease was up. She spent most of her nights at my apartment anyway, so it made sense. Every now and then she would crash at her apartment if she was super exhausted from work or if she had to get up extra early. She told me she did that just so she wouldn't disturb me when she got up and did her whole makeup routine to get ready. As much as I wished she was at my apartment, I didn't really mind that much since she was only a few blocks away. What I didn't know at the time was that she was using her old room as a place to film for her OnlyFans. I didn't even know she had an OnlyFans. She didn't have the best job when I met her. She was making about $16 an hour and she was being worked to the bone. She would constantly be complaining about terrible coworkers, the things she had to do, and how exhausted she was at the end of every day. Took me a little while to notice, but she stopped complaining about all of that. Not only was she not telling me about her workday, she suddenly had all of this money to throw into our wedding. She wanted designer dresses, the nicest venue, premium organic food, you name it. I told her I had no idea how we were going to afford her dream wedding, but she just kept telling me that we would figure it out. I found out about her account by complete coincidence. Realistically, there was probably some algorithm that brought me to this. My girlfriend looked like my dream girl, so most of the pictures I would look at online were of women who looked very similar. I was scrolling through some Twitter comments, and I saw one of those ads for an OnlyFans account nested within them. It wasn't from her account, it was from somebody's account that just listed a bunch of different models to get views. I had to do a double take when I scrolled past it to make sure it really was her. I was 100% certain that the woman in the video I saw was my fiancée. Now there's no shame in having these accounts and making money from them. Honestly, if they can hustle doing that, then good for them, but I wished I would have known that my girlfriend had one herself. I'm a pretty traditional guy and I don't love the idea of other men online seeing my girlfriend completely naked doing God only knows what. Of course, I had to click on the account to see what was happening. I paid $14 for a month's subscription so I could see for myself what she was posting. For the most part, it was all stuff she was doing by herself. I recognized right away that it was in her old apartment, so it finally made sense why she was so hesitant to leave. I didn't like that she was doing this, and at the very least I wished she'd told me. I thought maybe we could have a conversation about it and I could convince her to delete it. It wasn't worth throwing away our future. At least I thought that until I saw a collaboration she did with another creator. They were in her room and there was a full video of her having sex with some random man. The more I scrolled, the more content of the two of them that I found. It looked like they had filmed 10 videos together and had taken countless photos. All of her subscribers loved it and were asking for more of them together. I scrolled back further and found another collaboration with a woman that I recognized as her roommate. I was shocked by all of it, but I couldn't look away. I didn't understand why she would open an account without speaking to me about it, and how could she so casually cheat on me on the account. I couldn't stay at home and see her, so I crashed at my buddy's place and talked to him about it. He helped talk me down and figure out what I should do. We both came up with the idea of ruining her account. I still had my subscription, so we commented on a post pretending to be another hot girl and invited a bunch of her subscribers to watch an Instagram live of us. Of course, a bunch of them jumped at the opportunity. When I had enough people, I explained what happened, telling all of those men that she had cheated on me and kept the entire account a secret. A lot of them didn't like that because she was pretending to be this nice sweetheart when she spoke to them. They felt like she was lying to them, so they canceled their subscriptions. My fiancée found out and came to confront me at my friend's house when she saw that I wasn't home. We had a huge argument and she tried to explain to me that she was doing it for us so we could have a nice wedding. I just told her that the wedding was off and explained that she needed to get her things out of my apartment. She tried to convince me not to leave her, but I had no interest in being with her after what I'd seen. We ended up officially breaking up and calling off the wedding. She's continued using her OnlyFans. Apparently the guy she had collaborated with had a girlfriend who didn't know about the videos they made. She dumped him and posted a video explaining what happened, and his account tanked too. I was glad that my video could help her see the truth. OP, I can't believe you had to go through that. Creating an account on something like that is something you should disclose to your partner. From the sound of it, you would have definitely done whatever you could to give your fiancée her dream wedding. It's such a shame she would go behind your back like that. Her hiding the account was bad enough without secretly sleeping with another man for content. They had agreed to film together several times. That goes far beyond a one-time collaboration. The two of them must have had some other kind of connection. I'm glad you were able to break away from her, and I'm glad your story was able to help another person in a similar situation. I wish you well, and I hope you can recover from this. Thank you all for taking the time to listen to today's stories. If you enjoyed listening, please feel free to like and subscribe if you haven't already. Also, comment below with your thoughts on what happened. If there is about your own situation or someone else's, then please do not hesitate to contact me.